It's because of 80s camp movies that I never ever really wanted to go to summer camp. And when I did go to summer camp, I probably slept about 10 hours the entire time. Meatballs was a good time. Ernest Goes to Camp was funny, but it's movies like Friday the 13th and 1983 Sleepaway Camp, which we are talking about here today, that ruined it for me. Without further ado, let's cut into this one. I was skeptical about this movie going in because it seems like it's just coming in off the coattails of Friday the 13th. And I'm a Friday the 13th fan, and I'm insanely loyal to the franchises that I love. So anything that I view as lesser than, I really had kind of a skewed opinion going into the film. We get the suspenseful music, we get the trees full of turning leaves, and we get the beautiful lake right by a campsite. We look over the entire campsite and we hear a lot of voices, but we don't see any people. Was this perhaps before? Is this an after shot? We do see a for sale sticker stuck up on the Camp Arawak sign, so I was confused right off the get-go. But nice scene, father out boating with his son and daughter, boat gets tipped over, everybody's having laughs, there's another gentleman on shore waving them in before tragedy strikes, and there's an accident with a speedboat and a couple of people not really paying attention claims the life of the father and presumably of the little boy. It looks like Angela's the one that survives the accident because we see her next with her aunt and her cousin Ricky, and they're getting ready to go off into summer camp. Now I know we're awfully early in this film, but once we hear this aunt and once we see her, immediate pick for the killer of the movie. One, because it's an obvious Friday the 13th influence with the camp setting, the crazy woman doing all the dastardly deeds. It just seems like a shoo-in. She's a doctor though. She's crazy, but she's a doctor, and she hands Ricky and Angela both a set of physical forms to give to the camp counselors as soon as they get there. She tells them, don't ask questions, don't tell anybody about anything, here are your forms. I thought that was a really, really odd point of this movie. But after I saw the whole thing, it makes an awful lot of sense. This camp looks really good, actually, and bus after bus full of kids pull up. These youngsters rush off, excited to be there, and they head off to find their specific friend groups. We've got the staff looking a little anxious, some of them look a little overwhelmed, but the cook, that's the problem here, because this guy is sitting back and he's making awfully suggestive and inappropriate remarks at these teenagers coming off of these buses. Now, when I say teenagers, I'm not talking about 17 or 18 year olds. I mean, these are 14 and 15 year olds that this guy is leering at, making remarks like, look at all this fresh chicken. Super strange. This would have been enough for me. If I'd have seen this and I'd had kids during this time frame, I'd have never sent them to summer camp. Ever. While these kids race off to find their friends, exchanging high fives and welcome backs, we see Angela is a mute. At least she comes off as a mute at the onset of this film. She has this blank stare on her face. She's got the best poker face you'll ever see in your life. And you've got to assume this is from the trauma from losing her dad and her brother. Now, she does have her cousin Ricky there looking out for her, but Ricky has his own issues he's got to deal with because his ex-girlfriend Judy seems to have developed quite a bit over the year, and she's attracting a lot of the attention from a lot of the older boys. Now, because Angela doesn't seem to be interested in eating, she thinks she goes a couple of days and she's not really taking in much food, the head counselor there decides to bring her to the cook in order to see if he can make her something special that she might be interested in eating. This is a disaster waiting to happen. Worst possible idea, and this creepy cook takes Angela from the counselor into the walk-in cooler and asks her if she sees anything she likes while he's unbuckling his pants. Now, Chris Hansen would have been able to make a career off of what's going on at this camp, and we'll get to some more of that later. Fortunately for Angela, and fortunately for us as viewers, Ricky storms in there, confronts the guy. The guy slams Ricky up against a crate, telling him, hey, you didn't see anything, before racing out of the walk-in. So not only is this dude trying to sexually assault somebody very young, he's beating these kids up too. This is not a nice guy. And this was my favorite at this moment for the killer in this film. For the briefest of moments, he was the favorite. Then he gets his skin melted off by a boiling pot of water. The biggest pot of water I've ever seen in my life, mind you. And somehow that still felt like he was being let off a little too easy for my liking. We got some serious authenticity in this film with how the different groups of kids were divided. And it was just like me when I was young. I mean, we had all our own groups, and our groups typically didn't mingle with other groups. It was kind of like gangs in New York for me on the playground. It seems a little over the top, but especially when I moved to North Carolina with my accent, forget it. It was a disaster. You stuck with your own on the playground, trust me. And that's what happened here in this movie. And during the baseball game between two different groups of kids, we find out that Ricky himself is a pretty damn good trash talker. He had a potty mouth on him, but he could lay into some guys and blister them with his words. So we get to the social later that evening, and the group of guys that Ricky had issues with on the baseball diamond decide, we're going to mess with Angela. We're going to try to get her down by the water, see if we can talk this little girl into going skinny dipping. Naturally, Angela still hasn't spoke to this point, just stares blankly at them, irritates them to the fact where they're just outright calling her names in front of everybody, before Ricky and his best friend Paul, of course, intervene and a fight breaks out. This is where we get a somewhat tender moment for Angela and Paul, who is Ricky's friend. Angela starts to feel a little comfortable around him. Paul's telling jokes, he's telling stories, he's trying to make her feel welcome at the camp. When Paul is pulled away by one of the counselors, he says, "Good night, Angela," and we finally hear Angela talk. She says, "Good night."
Good night. Good night.
Now Meg, who is one of the lead counselors there, she's really tight with Judy, and Judy and Meg are not happy at all that Angela's getting any sort of positive attention. They are bullies of the worst kind in this movie, and they want to make sure they keep Angela as whittled down as they can. Now I try to be forward thinking. I like to think I'm forward thinking, but the skinny dipping scene here was very weird to me. Now, a group of guys goes up to a group of girls and tries to convince them to get in the water with them, and the girls are hesitant. The girls don't want to do it. Fine, no big deal. The guys, however, decide to go ahead and strip down to nothing, and there's like 8 to 10 of them, and they all go skinny dipping together. Now, again, no judgment. It came off a little strange to me. Of all those many dipshits, Kenny's actually the only one that has any success with the fairest sex. When Leslie agrees to go on a canoe trip with him that evening. Now, he blows it by being a putz and tipping the canoe over and trying to scare her. She's pissed. She swims away towards the dock. Kenny clearly sees her swimming away towards the dock, yet he decides to duck his head under into the overturned canoe, come up out of the water, and start calling out for her. There's no way she's going to hear him, but he still calls out to Leslie. Somebody he doesn't want to see comes in under that canoe, and then the Kenny problem is solved, and we'll leave it at that. Every second that Paul and Ricky aren't around Angela, Meg and Judy are all over her. They bully her relentlessly in this movie, and Billy, who is the group leader of the boys that Paul and Ricky don't really like, he winds up being killed by a beehive being dropped on him in a toilet. Very creative, very innovative way to dispatch of somebody. But the owner of the camp, a man named Mel, he has to start sending kids home because some of these kids don't feel safe anymore. Some kids don't even care. They just want to enjoy their summer. They want to be around each other. They're hoping to get lucky, and they stick around. But Mel, he's trying to piece together what's going on at his camp and who he believes to be doing this killing, because some were made to look like accidents, but some are clearly the result of foul play. Some of the better parts of this movie are when Angela is around Paul, because she feels like she can let her guard down. We don't have to see that terrifying stare on her face. It's very unsettling, and things are going real well between Angela and Paul, but Paul's a guy, and Paul's trying to round those bases, and when he tries to unbutton her shirt, Angela goes back to being comatose with that blank look. She gets a flashback, and she sees her and her brother looking in on her dad lovingly in bed with another man. She ends up freaking out, pushes Paul off, and runs away. This is rejection that Paul takes very, very hard. And after constant pressure and propositioning by Judy, Paul winds up making out with her in the middle of the woods, only for Angela and Ricky to happen upon both of them. Ricky's betrayed because Paul's his friend and Judy's his ex, and then Angela, of course, is betrayed because she hates Judy and she really likes Paul. Even after taking her guy, though, Judy does not let up on Angela, and with Megan's help, she winds up grabbing hold of Angela and tossing her into the water. Now, Ricky can't run off and save his cousin because Mel has decided that Ricky's responsible for all the deaths, and it makes sense if you really think about it. The people that have been killed thus far at the camp are all people that have been mean to or picked on Angela and done it consistently. So it's only natural to think that Ricky, being aggressive and foul-mouthed, might act harshly at somebody treating his family members so disrespectfully. Now, much like we talked about earlier with the cook, the adults here have no concept of children or adolescence or innocence because Mel, the owner of the camp, is in his late 60s if he's a day old. He still sets up a date with Meg, who cannot be more than 16 or 17. And she's eager to meet him that night. She's excited, she's getting ready, she's anxious to get in the shower so she can get her date started. Between Mel and this cook earlier, you could have had one of the more successful predator stings in law enforcement history, no questions asked. Now, I'm not exactly sure how Judy dies, aside from it being with a curling iron. There's shadows and there's suggestion, but you never really see it. And God, that's a hell of a way to go. She was one of the worst people in the movie anyways, though, so I kind of popped for it. But when Mel finds Meg after she's been killed, he goes haywire. He goes full-blown Oscar-worthy, I want to be respected by my peers, turns in a hell of a performance. Never mind the fact that he was trying to bed a minor that night. This grumbly old man decides he's out for blood, and when he finally does catch up with Ricky, who he believes is behind the whole thing, he goes full-on Hulk smash with the beating he lays on him. Not too long afterwards, though, he leaves Ricky lifeless, presumably dead, but he stumbles onto an archery range, and for his trouble, he gets an arrow right through his neck. Another nod to Friday the 13th, perhaps. We're at the point in this film where the campers and the counselors that are alive, they're starting to catch wind of everything going on. Now, whereas I thought this movie was centered around a revenge killer who was taking out everyone that had wronged them, we get a bit of a swerve there when several little boys who were asleep in their sleeping bags in the woods wind up getting hatcheted to death. I'm not a fan of that. I wasn't really big on that scene, but it makes this massacre a hell of a lot more sinister going that far. Once the cop shows up, everybody starts discovering bodies, and they hear singing down by the water. Now, without going into any of these specifics, it's an old movie, but maybe some people haven't seen it. I'm really not big on spoiling things if I can avoid it. This is a memorable ending, and the reveal here is just crazy. It haunted me for years, and I'm still not 100% okay with it. But that is what you want out of a horror film. You want to give the audiences something they didn't see coming. We did not see the ending of this movie coming. Overall, though, paint by numbers camp slasher flick. I mean, a couple of truly likable characters, but the crazy aunt of Angela's was memorable for sure, way over the top. But it just felt like, to me, Sleepaway Camp is cashing in on Friday the 13th success. It's its own thing. It spawned its own sequels. I gave this one a 6 out of 10 because it's an enjoyable flick. It feels like it's 90 minutes, so I won't say it's a breezy watch, but overall, I'm not going to say it ages gracefully, only because I don't see a situation where I will watch this again. For me, to make it rewatchable, you have to have people you want to watch, and I don't want to watch any of these characters. Now, for those of you keeping score, this is episode 49 here. This is our 49th movie review. And I guess we have to do something cool for 50, right? So maybe we get somebody who's a trained and talented musician to come in and play us a song. Yeah. I'm pretty sure you know what that means. See you on the other side.